When US President Donald Trump walked into the Oval Office on Wednesday morning, few expected what came next. For the first time in his second term, Trump imposed Ukraine-related sanctions on Russia, marking a significant shift in his approach toward Moscow, and perhaps a sign of growing frustration with President Vladimir Putin as the war grinds on. It's been over 3 years since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. The world has watched the war reshape geopolitics, energy trade, and global alliances. Yet until now, Trump had avoided direct sanctions against Russia's energy giants, the very companies funding Moscow's war effort. That changed this week. On Wednesday, the US Treasury Department announced sweeping sanctions targeting Russia's two largest oil companies, Lukoil and Rosneft. These firms are the backbone of Russia's energy exports, collectively accounting for more than half of the country's oil production and a major source of revenue for the Kremlin. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent released a statement saying, "Given President Putin's refusal to end this senseless war, Treasury is sanctioning Russia's two largest oil companies that fund the Kremlin's war machine. We encourage our allies to join us and adhere to these sanctions." The Treasury also made it clear this could just be the beginning. It signaled readiness to take further action if Moscow does not agree to an immediate ceasefire. This move aligns the United States more closely with its European allies, particularly the United Kingdom, which imposed similar sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil just a week earlier. What makes this decision remarkable is how sharply it contrasts with Trump's previous stance on the war. During his second term, Trump had largely avoided Ukraine-related sanctions, opting instead for trade-based measures. For instance, earlier this year, he imposed 25% tariffs on goods from India, not Russia, to pressure New Delhi over its continued purchases of discounted Russian oil. At the time, Trump argued that tariffs were a better economic weapon than sanctions, which he believed could weaken the dollar's dominance in global oil transactions. He often expressed discomfort with long-term sanctions, saying in 2024, "I like to remove sanctions quickly. Sanctions hurt the dollar and push countries to trade in other currencies." But Wednesday's move suggests a clear shift in strategy, a sign that the president's patience with Putin may be wearing thin. To understand the significance of this move, it's important to look at how Russia's oil trade has evolved since the start of the war. Following the 2022 invasion, Western nations, including the US, UK, and European Union, imposed a $60 per barrel price cap on Russian oil. This was designed to cut Moscow's profits while keeping global oil prices stable. As a result, Russia's main oil buyers shifted dramatically from Europe to Asia, with India and China emerging as its largest customers. In 2024, India's imports of Russian crude reportedly reached 1.8 million barrels per day, nearly 40% of its total oil imports. China imported even more, making up over 45% of Russia's oil exports by volume. Yet, despite the shift, the Kremlin continued to profit. Even with discounted sales, Russia's oil revenues accounted for roughly 1/3 of its federal budget in 2024, a crucial financial lifeline for its war in Ukraine. By directly targeting Rosneft and Lukoil, the Trump administration is striking at the core of that revenue stream. But without including banks, insurers, or secondary buyers, such as Indian or Chinese refiners, analysts question how much impact these sanctions will have. Reactions to the announcement have been mixed. Former Treasury Department sanctions investigator Jeremy Panner, now a partner at Hughes Hubbard and Reed, noted, "The absence of banks and Indian or Chinese oil purchases in Wednesday's sanctions will not get Putin's attention. In other words, unless the US moves to penalize third parties dealing with Rosneft and Lukoil, something known as secondary sanctions, Russia could continue selling oil through alternative routes. However, some experts welcome the decision as long overdue. Meanwhile, in Kyiv, the mood was notably more upbeat. A senior Ukrainian official described the sanctions as great news, adding that Rosneft and Lukoil had long been among Kyiv's top targets in its request to Washington. Russia, on the other hand, appeared dismissive. President Vladimir Putin downplayed the sanctions' significance, insisting that Russia's energy sector was resilient and already well adapted to Western restrictions. The Russian embassy in Washington and its mission to the United Nations did not immediately respond to requests for comment. Adding to the day's developments, Trump also revealed that he had cancelled a planned summit in Hungary with President Putin. He told reporters it didn't feel like the right time. The decision to call off the meeting, originally planned to discuss regional security and energy cooperation, underscores the growing strain between Washington and Moscow. While Trump insisted he still hopes the sanctions won't need to remain in place for long, his actions sent a clear political message. The US is no longer sitting on the sidelines. The move also comes amid pressure from allies who have long urged Washington to take a firmer stance against Russia. European diplomats privately noted that the lack of US sanctions had created gaps in the global pressure campaign, gaps that Russia exploited to reroute trade and sustain its war effort. For now, the effectiveness of these sanctions will depend on how far the US is willing to go. If secondary sanctions are introduced, targeting intermediaries or financial institutions that help move Russian oil, the economic impact could be severe. But such measures also risk escalating tensions with India and China, both key US trading partners. Domestically, Trump faces a delicate balance. He has long criticized sanctions as double-edged swords, warning they could undermine the dollar's dominance if countries shift to using the Chinese yuan or local currencies for oil transactions. Indeed, Russia has already begun settling some energy deals in rupees and yuan, a trend accelerated by Western restrictions. Still, for Ukraine, this week's development is seen as a breakthrough. The targeting of Rosneft and Lukoil, two of Russia's biggest economic engines, represents the strongest signal yet from Washington that it is willing to directly confront Moscow's wartime funding network. 3 years into the war, the battlefield may still be in eastern Ukraine, but the financial front has just opened a new chapter. Trump's sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil are more than a policy move. They are a message to Moscow, and perhaps to the world, that even Washington's most unconventional president has limits to his patience. Yet, as experts warn, the real test lies ahead. Will this mark the start of a sustained US sanctions campaign? Or just a symbolic strike meant to signal frustration? In global geopolitics, sometimes the biggest shifts begin not with a bang, but with a list of sanctioned names.